When the power grid fails and your freezer becomes a useless metal box full of rotting food, you'll have 48 hours before decay destroys your entire harvest. The biggest mistake modern growers make is assuming they need electricity to preserve food. History proves otherwise. Before refrigeration, our ancestors stored vegetables from October until May, using nothing but the earth itself. Today, we're breaking down the 7 methods that work when the grid goes down, ranked from easiest to most effective. These methods made the list for 4 reasons. No electricity required. When the grid fails, passive storage continues working. Maintains 32 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit, the temperature range that triggers dormancy in root crops, stopping rot without freezing. Achieves 90 to 95% humidity, the exact level preventing shriveling without promoting mold. Proven for centuries. Our ancestors survived winters using these techniques when failure meant starvation. Hit subscribe now, because when the grid fails, this knowledge becomes the difference between eating and starving. By the time everyone else figures this out, it'll be too late to build infrastructure. Method 7. The earth clamp. The original bunker technique used in Northern Europe for centuries. Stores root crops right in the garden bed with zero construction. Maintains 32 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit with 90 to 95% humidity by exploiting the Earth's constant ambient temperature below the frost line. Here's what most people get wrong. They bury crops at frost line depth. Translation: frozen vegetables by January. The earth clamp works because it goes below the frost line, the deepest point soil freezes in your climate. To build an earth clamp, check your frost line depth. In northern states, this is 48 to 60 inches deep. In the mid-Atlantic, 24 to 48 inches. Select a dry sloped location. Water pooling destroys stored crops through rot. Excavate a circular pit 6 to 12 inches deep, twice the diameter of your potato pile. Line the bottom with logs or broken rubble for drainage, then add a 3-inch straw layer. Stack potatoes in an A-frame or cone shape to 2 to 3 feet high. Surround with 6 to 12 inches of straw, then cover with 4 to 6 inches of firmly pressed earth. Install a central air shaft using perforated pipe extending several inches above the mound. Prevent suffocation from CO2 buildup. Add a second 6-inch earth layer as winter approaches for additional insulation. Dig a perimeter drainage trench to direct water away from the clamp. Zero maintenance required once constructed. Access vegetables by digging through the side of the mound, then resealing with straw and earth. Stores potatoes, carrots, beets, turnips, and parsnips for 4 to 8 months. Works best for climates with frozen winters where the earth provides natural refrigeration. Why it's on the list: requires zero purchased materials, exploits physics instead of technology, proven for centuries when failure meant death. But the next method doesn't require a basement at all. It uses the earth itself as your storage container, and you probably already own one. Method 6. The buried trash can. The homesteader's root cellar. Works anywhere you can dig below frost line. Maintains 32 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit by utilizing the Earth's constant ambient temperature once you bury below frost line. Achieves 85 to 95% humidity naturally through earth contact. Pro tip: most people use plastic trash cans. Translation: cracked container by spring. Use galvanized metal. It survives frost heave and doesn't leach chemicals into your food. To build the buried trash can system, purchase a 30-gallon galvanized metal trash can with tight-fitting lid. Dig a hole vertically so the lid sits 2 to 4 inches above soil level when can is buried. Line the bottom with 4 to 6 inches of straw or wood chips for drainage and insulation. Drill 4 quarter-inch ventilation holes near the top of the can to prevent CO2 buildup. Pack vegetables in layers separated by 2 to 3 inches of damp sand or sawdust. Insulate the lid with straw bales stacked 12 to 18 inches thick. Mark the location with a stake. Buried cans disappear under snow. Check monthly for condensation. If interior walls are dripping wet, open lid for 2 hours to release moisture. If vegetables feel dry, sprinkle 1 cup water over top sand layer. Stores potatoes, carrots, beets, rutabagas for 5 to 7 months. Does not work for onions or squash. They need dry conditions. Why it's on the list: costs under £50, requires no basement, rodent-proof, accessible year-round even under snow. But what if you don't have land for burial? The next method works in any basement corner, even apartment buildings with shared basements. Method 5. The basement corner room, the urban root cellar. exploits your existing foundation walls as thermal mass, achieves 35 to 42 degrees Fahrenheit when properly insulated and ventilated, maintains 80 to 90% humidity through passive earth contact via masonry walls. The biggest mistake basement builders make: insulating the exterior walls. Translation: you trap heat inside your storage room. Insulate the interior walls instead. Separate your cold corner from the warm basement. To build a basement corner root cellar, select a corner with 2 exterior masonry walls, preferably north-facing to minimize summer heat gain. Frame interior partition walls using 2x4 studs spaced 16 inches on center. Install 1 to 2 inches rigid foam insulation on interior partition walls, not exterior masonry walls. Use polystyrene or polyurethane, not fiberglass. Damp environments destroy fiberglass. Cover foam with 6mm polyethylene vapor barrier on the warm side facing basement, then finish with plywood or aspenite. Insulate the ceiling heavily with 2 to 4 inches rigid foam. Heat rises. Your biggest threat comes from above. Install 2 3 to 4 inch diameter vents. Low intake vent 2 to 4 inches above floor allows cold air entry, and high exhaust vent near ceiling, 6 to 8 feet above intake, permits warm air exit. Add dampers to both vents for seasonal adjustment. Build ceiling-mounted shelving using wireframes and 2x12 lumber. Never use floor-standing shelves. They block air circulation. Open vents fully during winter for passive cooling. Close vents partially or fully during spring and summer when outdoor air exceeds cellar temperature. Inspect weekly for condensation. If walls are dripping, increase ventilation. Stores potatoes, carrots, beets, cabbage for 4 to 6 months. Temperature stability depends on basement insulation and ventilation management. Why it's on the list: works in urban and suburban settings, uses existing infrastructure, accessible without going outside in winter, scales to large harvests. But that method requires construction skills. The next one uses materials you already have and takes 2 hours to build. Method 4. The sand clamp in garden bed. Storage that happens where you grew the crop. 0 hauling, 0 containers. Maintains 32 to 38 degrees Fahrenheit by using the garden bed itself as insulation. Achieves 95 to 100% humidity through soil contact, the highest humidity level possible. Here's the secret Northern European farmers used. You don't harvest carrots and beets at all. You leave them in the ground, cover them with 12 to 18 inches of straw mulch, and harvest as needed all winter. To build a sand clamp in your garden bed, after first frost cut tops off carrots, beets, parsnips to 1 inch above crown. Leave roots in ground. Cover the bed with 12 to 18 inches of straw, hay, or leaves. This prevents soil from freezing solid. Top with 6 inches of loose soil or sand to prevent mulch from blowing away. Mark the bed edges with stakes so you can find it under snow. To harvest, dig through mulch and soil, pull what you need, immediately replace mulch layers, 0 maintenance. Add more mulch in late December if you experience a January thaw followed by deep freeze. Exposed soil freezes solid and ruins the system. Works for carrots, beets, parsnips, turnips through entire winter until spring thaw. Does not work for potatoes. They rot in wet soil. Does not work for onions or garlic. They need dry conditions. Why it's on the list: 0 construction, 0 materials cost, highest possible humidity for crops that need it. Harvest as you go convenience. But temperature alone isn't enough. The next method solves the humidity problem most people ignore, and it determines whether your crops last 2 months or 8 months. Method 3. The storage triangle system. Not a physical structure, a framework that makes or breaks every other method on this list. The storage triangle: temperature, humidity, and ventilation. Get one wrong, and your crops rot in weeks. Get all 3 right, and they last 9 months. Temperature. Most root vegetables enter dormancy at 32 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Too warm and they sprout, too cold and they freeze. The sweet spot is 38 to 40 degrees for potatoes, 32 to 35 degrees for carrots and beets. Humidity. If it's too dry, they shrivel. If it's too wet, they rot. The target is 90 to 95% relative humidity for cold and moist crops. That's the saturation point where vegetables lose water at minimal rates, but condensation doesn't form. Ventilation. Stored vegetables continue respiring, consuming oxygen and producing CO2 and ethylene gas. Without air exchange, CO2 suffocates the crop, and ethylene gas accelerates aging. Passive ventilation through low intake and high exhaust vents removes these gases without mechanical fans. What most people get wrong, they focus on temperature and ignore humidity. Translation: perfectly cool storage with 60% humidity produces shriveled, inedible vegetables by December. Humidity is equally critical to temperature. To implement the storage triangle, measure temperature weekly using a min-max thermometer placed at mid-shelf height. Assess humidity visually. If condensation accumulates on walls, humidity exceeds 95%. Increase ventilation. If vegetables feel rubbery or soft, humidity is too low. Reduce ventilation or spray floor with water. Ensure continuous air movement. No stagnant zones. Stack vegetables loosely, never in solid piles. Use ceiling-mounted shelves, not floor units. Adjust ventilation seasonally. Vents fully open in winter. Cold outdoor air cools cellar. Vents closed in summer. Warm outdoor air would heat cellar. When all three variables align, potatoes store 6 to 8 months, carrots 7 to 9 months, beets 4 to 5 months, cabbage 3 to 4 months. Why it's on the list explains why the other methods work or fail. Every physical storage system on this list succeeds or fails based on whether it maintains the storage triangle. But what about crops that need it dry, like pumpkins and onions? The next method creates separate climate zones in the same storage space. Method 2, the zoned storage system, divides your storage space into climate zones. Cold and moist for roots, warm and dry for squash, cool and dry for onions. Zone 1, cold and very moist. Temperature 32 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity 90 to 95%. Crops: potatoes, carrots, beets, parsnips, turnips, rutabagas, cabbage. Zone 2, warm and dry. Temperature 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity 50 to 75%. Crops: butternut squash, Hubbard squash, pumpkins, not acorn squash. Stores only 4 to 7 weeks. Zone 3, cool and dry. Temperature 32 to 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity 60 to 70%. Crops: onions, garlic, shallots. Here's what nobody tells you about zoning. You cannot store these categories together. Winter squash at 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit will cause potatoes stored in the same room to sprout within weeks. Onions need dry air, but carrots need saturated air. Store them together and either the onions rot or the carrots shrivel. To create zones, use separate rooms. Zone 1, cold and moist. Basement corner root cellar with passive ventilation. Zone 2, warm and dry. Upstairs cupboard, unheated bedroom, or insulated shed. Zone 3, cool and dry. Unheated garage, cold pantry, or second basement room with active ventilation to reduce humidity. Or use partitions within one space, hang vinyl curtains, or build temporary walls to separate cold and moist section from warm and dry section. Install separate ventilation for each zone, dedicated intake and exhaust vents. Monitor each zone independently with thermometers and visual humidity checks. When properly zoned, Zone 1 crops last 4 to 9 months. Zone 2 crops last 8 to 27 weeks, variety dependent, Hubbard superior to butternut. Zone 3 crops last 3 to 12 months, pungent onions superior to sweet onions. Why it's on the list explains why single environment storage fails for diverse harvests, gives you year-round food security instead of 3-month storage before waste begins. But all these methods fail if you make one critical mistake with ethylene gas. The next section reveals what ruins more stored crops than temperature or humidity combined. Method 1. Ethylene Gas Isolation Protocol. The invisible threat that accelerates rot, triggers sprouting, and destroys months of storage work in weeks. Ethylene is a plant hormone, a gas naturally produced by ripening fruit and certain vegetables. When potatoes are exposed to ethylene from nearby onions or apples, the hormone penetrates the tuber surface and triggers premature sprouting. When winter squash is exposed to ethylene, the rind thins and fungal decay accelerates. Pro tip: onions are the worst ethylene producers in storage. They emit the compound constantly. Store onions with potatoes and your potatoes sprout within 6 to 8 weeks instead of lasting 6 to 8 months. Store onions with squash and your squash rots by January. High ethylene producers never store with other crops: onions, garlic, apples, pears, tomatoes if ripening any green harvested. ethylene-sensitive crops require isolation from producers. Potatoes, sprouting accelerates. Carrots, bitterness develops. Winter squash, rind deterioration, fungal growth. Beets, toughening, off flavours. Store onions and garlic in a completely separate room from all other crops. If separate room unavailable, store in sealed containers. Onions in mesh bags in closed cabinet. Never store potatoes near apples, even if apples are in a different section of the same room. Ethylene diffuses through air. Walls and distance are the only protection. Consume ethylene producers first in autumn and early winter before moving to long-term root storage management. Proper ethylene isolation extends potato storage from 8 to 12 weeks to 24 to 26 weeks. Extends winter squash from 4 to 8 weeks to 12 to 27 weeks depending on variety. Why it's number 1 solves the hidden failure mode. You can nail temperature, humidity and ventilation, but one onion stored with potatoes destroys the entire system. The 3 fatal mistakes most people make. Mistake 1. Skipping the curing process. Potatoes require 2 weeks of curing at 45 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit with 85 to 95% humidity before storage. During curing, minor cuts heal, skin thickens, and dormancy deepens. Skip curing and potatoes rot within 4 to 6 weeks regardless of storage conditions. Onions require 4 to 6 weeks of curing to seal the neck and harden outer scales. Skip curing and onions rot from the neck down within weeks. Winter squash requires 7 to 10 days at 80 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit to harden the rind. Skip curing and squash develops thin, penetrable skin that invites fungal invasion. Mistake 2. Storing damaged or diseased specimens. One rotting potato spreads pathogens to every potato it touches. Within weeks, a single diseased specimen destroys an entire storage box. Sort ruthlessly before storage. Remove any potato with soft spots, cuts, bruises, or blemishes. Remove any carrot with cracks or split roots. Remove any squash with punctured rind. Damaged specimens get consumed immediately or preserved through canning or freezing. Only perfect specimens enter long-term storage. Mistake 3. Ignoring weekly inspections. Storage isn't set and forget. Inspect stored crops weekly during the first month, fortnightly thereafter. Remove any developing rot immediately. Check for sprouting, indicates temperature too warm or ethylene exposure. Check for shriveling, indicates humidity too low. Check for condensation, indicates humidity too high or ventilation inadequate. Adjust conditions based on what the vegetables tell you. You've got until winter. That's your deadline. Build this infrastructure now whilst the grid is still running and materials are still available. Once the grid fails, you won't have time to learn these systems, and you won't have refrigeration to fall back on. These 7 methods represent centuries of survival knowledge. Our ancestors relied on them when failure meant starvation. You're choosing whether to rely on the grid to keep your food edible, or whether to build passive systems that work when everything else fails. Which method will you build first? The buried trash can for simplicity, the basement corner room for capacity, the earth clamp for zero cost. Drop your answer in the comments. Hit subscribe now. When the grid fails, this knowledge becomes the difference between eating and starving. Stop relying on the grid to keep your food edible.